Oh, we're live already. Messing with the camera, I didn't realize that it started already. So, such is life. It comes whether you are ready or not. So, welcome to this moment, the moment that does not exist. And today we're going to talk about how non-duality is not nothing. Before we get into that, I just want to say thank you for joining me in watching this video. I would ask, if you are not a subscriber, to click the subscribe button, to follow my YouTube channel. So when I do, I try to give a little bit of a heads up as to when I'm going to be doing a live video. My last video, I explained how I'm not going to do a whole lot of recorded videos at this time. And even though I did think, maybe I can do one on like a non-dual meditation, kind of a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing. But other than that, I just want to do live videos, be able to interact, be able to just kind of freely say what is on my mind and in my heart. And so subscribe. I want to get up to 1,000 subscribers, so then I can do this with my mobile device. And if you are aware of other video services that you think are worthwhile, I'm totally open to dumping YouTube and going elsewhere. But I haven't quite figured out another platform that I would want to do. But maybe there's one that you're aware of that people in the vein of non-duality enjoy. I know there's some other streaming services, but right now YouTube is king, but they're owned by Google and all that, so we know how that works. So today, the day that does not exist, we're going to talk about non-duality being not nothing. And the reason why I decided to make that kind of the main topic, and as we're talking here, if you're online and you have questions, feel free to add a chat message and I will get into that at some point here. But I had a comment from, as I pull it up on my mobile, let's see, give credit where credit is due. Michael Scollin Jr. said non-duality equals, and then it's blank, there's nothing there, so non-duality equals nothing. So I wanted to get into that topic to discuss a little bit about what that means, why people say that, and kind of my person take on it. And so when you get into non-duality, a lot of the speakers that you will listen to will talk about how there is no person, nothing is happening, there is nothing. And I think the reason why those types of phrases get thrown around is because what ends up happening is we are conditioned to some extent, but it's a natural functioning of the human mind. The human mind is a meaning maker. That's kind of one of its main functions of especially abstract thinking, to create meaning, to seek for understanding. And so when we talk about non-duality is not nothing, I think the main reason is because obviously the opposite of nothing is everything. And so, or in the mix of that is there is something. And so duality would focus on self and other, me and not me. And so when you talk about nothing, what you're pointing to is this idea that we are here as human beings, we create meaning, we see ourselves as somewhat different or separate from reality, from all the others. We our language is based on this idea of categorizing life, um, giving things a name. A tree, why do we call it a tree? Is there a reason why we use those terms? You can get into the you know source of language and why we come up with the words that we do, but ultimately a tree is just a word that we can agree upon to say, hey, this is what a tree looks like, this is what a tree is. And so we can find meaning in communication with one another. It's a way to connect, even though in a sense it's a way to separate reality into all of its various forms. It's another way to be able to connect with other people and create meaning as a collective society or culture. And so when it comes to nothing, we only see something. And so by declaring that there is nothing, it's kind of it's a subversive kind of a term that we use in order to point to something that we always assumed is absolutely true. And so when we go through life and we recognize all of the various somethings, we have the me and the not me. Once someone says there is nothing, then it we kind of get on that shaky ground of confusion or lack of understanding, and it kind of puts our mind in defense and in a place that maybe opens up to other possibilities. And so we start to question reality in and of itself, and that can take its place in various forms, as far as where do we get to that point of questioning the nature of reality itself. And so then nothing is a direct pointing to that questioning of the assumption that we have throughout our entire lives, that we exist, that we are alive, that we are real, and that there is not nothing. And so by saying that there is nothing, it kind of completes the connection of the duality of self and other, if you will, of the reality as we see it. But what ends up happening is when you buy into the idea, or you conceptualize the idea that there is not nothing, or no, excuse me, that there is nothing, that there is no person, that nothing is happening, that can become just another belief system in and of itself. And so the mind works in really interesting ways, and it always wants to make that connection of meaning. And so it's easy to take whatever that we learn and put it into our own thought processes, and it can become a belief. And so, saying that there is not nothing may seem sacrilegious to other non-dual speakers, but non-duality isn't a religion, so they should be fine with that. But when you say there is nothing happening, the assumption is that there is not a person, there is nothing here experiencing this moment. And so the reason why you can, if you think about it conceptually, when there is nothing happening, what that means is there's nothing happening to a separate self. There is just everything. So the I, the me, is within everything or within nothing. And so whatever happens, that in a sense, it doesn't happen to anyone. So like if you take the reverse of that, so obviously non-duality talks about duality, talks about opposites, paradoxes. And so if you take the reverse of nothing, it's everything. And so if you look at yourself conceptually as everything, then there's nothing happening to you because you are everything. So every time, this slaps this, if you are both these things, there's nothing happening because it's just you slapping yourself, essentially. And so that's where the idea of there is nothing comes about. And so when that comes to the mental constructs of the separate self, we take that idea, that concept of not being anything, or there is nothing, there is no person, nothing is happening. We make that something that we take ownership of. We make that something that we can believe in. And so, even though the purpose of saying that is to kind of open ourselves up to other possibilities, what that can end up happening is we take that as, religion, if you will, and say, there is nothing. And so, coming from myself, who identifies as a type 5 on the Enneagram, which is um, a kind of an avoidant type personality, you can take this idea that there is not anything, that there's nothing, and make that something that you try to use. You try to make it a practical belief in your own life. And so instead of the truth of non-duality, you just use it as some sort of thing that you can help define who you are, or use it as a means to an end. And so when you say there is nothing and things happen that you don't like, you can try to write it off as and push to the side. Well, there is no person, so why should I be bothered by that? There is nothing happening, so the fact that I'm getting punched in the face doesn't bother me because there is no person to be punched in the face. There's just punching in the face. And so that becomes something that you believe in. And if you take a look at that system of belief, who is the one that is believing? It's still someone that believes that there is nothing. It's still something that you're taking ownership of as a separate self. And so when you say there is nothing, then you as a separate self are using that in a way to understand and create meaning in your life. And so it can be a way in which people avoid reality of what is appearing. And so it's a way, kind of a defense mechanism, to push away or avoid coming to terms with the reality that presents itself in every moment. So there is something and there is nothing. It is both. And in A Course in Miracles and some of their practices that they have you do as you go throughout that, especially I think in the early stages, it has you say things like, there is no chair, or the chair doesn't exist, or it's been a while. So it's something of that nature. But it also says, do it quickly and don't become attached to that idea. And the reason why I think it teaches those types of things in that respect is because it can easily become something that you attach to, that your mind attaches to, and saying that there is no chair. Well, okay, I'm going to make that a religion. I'm going to make that something I believe in. And so my mind takes control over it, versus casually and in a relaxed way saying there is no chair, there is no carpet, there is no hand, there are no thoughts, and that sort of thing. And so at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether you try to create meaning or try to utilize the thought or not. It's just that's what the mind does. And so I think a lot of times people try to use non-duality or non-dual awareness, some pinnacle stage where you can reach, where you're no longer attached to these ideas. You're no longer believing in this and that. And in a sense, it becomes its own religion that has weight, that you measure yourself up against, whether you are um, adhering to it or not. And so then it becomes yet another mind game of, there is nothing, but in this moment, I'm believing that there is something. And so that is an illusion, that is a lie. And so it's a constant judgment against who you perceive yourself to be. And so you use it in that sense. But it's just a word. So sometimes people can see non-duality in a certain respect, and so they see you have to act a certain way, you have to believe certain things because of your belief in non-duality. So you have to have a certain political stance or a certain um, belief system, or you have to negate religion, or, traditional type religion, or any sort of spirituality, because that is just another belief system that you have to disidentify with. But the main thread that is connected through all of this is that it's all about you. Your concern with non-duality as truth is whether or not you are fitting, you are living up to the expectations of this idea that you're a non-person, that you don't exist. And you're not concerned necessarily about anyone else being in that picture. And that's kind of where people get off track, because let's just say any of the non-dual speakers that are out there today are have reached this incredible infinite depth of non-dual awareness, where they are, God incarnate, if you want to say it that way, where they have become enlightened. They are the one that knows the ultimate truth. If that's the case, then why are you such a schmuck? Why am I a complete idiot? Because if they have reached the pinnacle and you haven't, what happens when you reach the pinnacle? The bar that you have tried to achieve, where you are the perfect manifestation of nothingness, of enlightenment. What happens to you when you reach that? What happens to all the morons? I assure you, they will likely still be there, but maybe you won't see them as morons anymore. Hopefully that clears up kind of my thought process, for what it's worth, on there is nothing or there is not nothing. Kind of two sides of the same coin. And when it comes down to it, it doesn't really matter how you define it. But when you make it something that you believe in, then it's something that you try to live up to or attain. And so recognize that in yourself. If you start to see that you are believing it in a certain way, and kind of look to the opposite of that to see what is true, question it. But if you don't, it doesn't really matter. But it does matter, exactly. So the next thing I wanted to get into was, someone asked me about what motivated me to start this channel, from Malcolm Humes, I assume. What motivated you to start this channel? So, thinking back through time doesn't exist, but just don't be late to work. Thinking back to what my experience was at the time of starting this channel, or prior to that, I was into photography and kind of making videos to some extent, and learning about that. And I was watching a lot of, I think I had just finished No, not just finished. Maybe a year before I'd finished the Course in Miracles, and then I started to kind of get into more watching YouTube videos of non-duality and watching some of the various speakers talk about it. And as I was listening, I would make connections in my own mind. I would relate to what they're saying and kind of think to myself, I would say it in this way, or I would describe it a little bit differently, or I like to think in analogies. So I'd be like, well, it's kind of like this. And so, just watching other speakers talk about non-duality, I guess my main goal initially was to think about it in different ways that other people can connect with. And I think how the mind works is it tries to create meaning. And so when there is a vacuum or a void, it jumps in to fill the gap. And so when maybe there's other ways that you can relate to the message of non-duality, because anyone could speak on non-duality and have a slightly different take, but it's all the same thing, the no thing, but people connect to it in different ways. And so and the reason for that is because the mind wants to always dodge being disenfranchised. Is that the right way of saying it? So it never wants to not have meaning. It always wants to have this level of control. It wants to feel like it exists. The idea that it doesn't exist is not palatable to the ego, to the mind, to the separate self. And so it wants to constantly avoid the void, or avoid what's the word? There's the emptiness, I can't think of the word right now. But that's what it doesn't like, because it wants to be ultimately in control. It wants to be real. It wants to be a solid. I can't remember how Paul Hederman says it, but watch his videos. I'm sure you'll catch that, but how he defines it. But it wants to be something that exists. And so it plays a lot of tricks. It's like a magician where, you have this understanding, you feel like you are free of it in the moment, you have this epiphany, but then the mind comes in and it wants to divert that attention into some other trap, if you will. And so there's so many different ways, so many different methods that the mind uses to not usurp that control, to not give up control that it has. And so that's where, certain voices may be relatable to you versus other voices. And so when you watch speakers, you may have a certain reaction, whether it's adoration and you think it's true, and you want to be like that person, or you're turned off by it, or you judge it and say, well, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. There's some sort of, reaction to the information that's coming towards yourself. And so in that reaction, if you look at that reaction, you can find truth. But what ends up happening is there's certain speakers that maybe there's a trap that you're currently in that points to that. It points directly to the BS that you're believing in, essentially. And so that is kind of this wake up call to say, oh, that's exactly what I'm doing. That's exactly my thought process. And I can question that thought process. And it's all about, to some extent, how do you release yourself of the habits of the belief systems that are not beneficial, the lies and misperceptions that you have? How do you release that? I think a large part of that is being able to see it, being able to have it manifest as an object. So you have to objectify those things that you're currently identifying as, or that you're identifying with. And by that bringing to light is if essentially you can see it for what it is. And prior to that light being shown on it, it's in the dark, it's in your shadow. And so it's something either you push away or identify with. It becomes is a dualistic mechanism. And so if you don't, and that's where I think, when we talk about spiritual growth or enlightenment or different, like the process of it all, a lot of times that's equated with pain. And so when you have pain and suffering, uh, that can be an opportunity of release for that which is untrue in your life. And so, I don't think it's necessary. Sometimes people say, in order to have growth, you have to go through adversity. I don't know if it's necessary, but that oftentimes is what happens when there is this period of growth, that which you have been denying, that which you have been kept in the shadows, is brought to the forefront, is brought to light, and then you can look at it and see it as what it is. And so then there's that moment of epiphany, if you will. And I think that's where sometimes in these circles, that's what people feed off on. That's what they're looking for. That sense of lightness, if you will, enlightenment. But that's just another thing that you can be chasing to try to achieve the ultimate lightness, the ultimate everlasting enlightenment. That's the key that I think everyone's looking to seek for. That idea that you are enlightened and you'll never have problems because suffering isn't real, because there is no one suffering and all that, which is just a story that we're telling ourselves. But that's what people are looking to achieve in a lot of ways, especially in these circles, I would say. And so when you're looking for that, you're trying to achieve that, that's the goal that you want to reach. And so a lot of weight is put upon these moments where you have these aha moments. I get it. I understand. I have this understanding. And I think those moments are where things drop away. You see things with clarity. The attachment that you had to that belief, even if it's momentarily goes away, you see that, and there's this sense of euphoria. You get like the dopamine shot, and it feels good. That's your experience, because the wall, the structure, the thing that's holding the flow back, because we flow. That's how energy works. And when there's blockages, there's blockades of that, you feel there's pain involved with that. So when you release that, it's this feeling of, oh man, I feel great. And so people, that's what they seek to have, and which is great. I mean, I think that's good to have those moments, but ultimately that is not what non-duality is really referring to. And so the basis of that release is the forgiveness, is grace, is non-duality, is love. Infinite love is the only truth. Everything else is illusion. That's the basis. That's the base. That's the ground in that. But it's just more seeking. So when I started first making videos, I wanted to, in my mind, a lot of times try to do the opposite of what I see is out there. And so, a lot of non-dual speakers do this type of talk where, you're kind of just off the cuff saying things. And I think sometimes there's certain buzz words or phrases that people use, like there is no person, and just kind of repeating that. And when you say, well, yeah, but what if, yes, but, Well, you do that. There is no person. Well, there's no one talking here. There's nothing going on. There's no one in this room. There is no one. Um, there's that's can be used as kind of a technique, if you will, that can be used over and over again because the mind always wants to say, well, yes, but. So you have those techniques, but I think the long form kind of mode where, well, I don't really care for whatever happens, in this moment is perfection. And so a lot of times you have videos like this where it's just kind of off the cuff, rambling. But so I initially wanted to kind of do the opposite and make it more of, a package deal and make it more like, if you watch like how to make a successful YouTube video, there's tons of videos that describe, how do you make a YouTube video that people want to watch, want to click on. The problem with non-duality is it doesn't give you anything. So the first thing you have to start with is a value proposition that someone wants to get or have or learn about, um, or emulate. And so, how to how to fix a sink, like you start with that, and then the packaging and in the presentation and how you build that into a video. You have to have the right, you have to have it look good. And I think a big thing is the sound because, a lot of people, um, even if your video stinks, if what you're saying and the sound quality is good, it can be a really powerful video. Um, but there is obviously it's a visual medium being video, and so you want to have it presented in a certain way, and you want to have those hooks because in the information world that we live in today, with everyone being a marketer to some extent, we all have our brand. So that's the brand of non-duality, is there is nothing. That's the brand to some extent. But there has to be a brand in your videos, and so what you want to do is have a hook at the beginning. So you want to tell the person, what your video is about, but in a compelling way. You don't have to necessarily say, because a lot of it's a little cliche. You've seen this before, and I've mentioned this before. Hey guys, today we're going to talk about non-duality and how it can completely change your life, and 5 of your best practices to find enlightenment, or whatever bull that I'm talking about. But when it comes to non-duality, there's really nothing that you can sell. But I wanted to take that in my initial videos, is try to make it something that I was selling, because that would be the opposite of, because I think what happens is people have this perception of, you can't have a selling proposition. You can't have a packaged video that follows the parameters of what YouTube says would make a successful video, or just knowing how human perception and how that all works. Because you want to hook them in early on, and then kind of have a long form, and then have something at the end of the video that you promise that you want to make sure that they stick around for. You want to promote yourself to make sure that you have people clicking on your videos and liking and all that. So there's a whole formula that a lot of people use, and partly because we're not necessarily unique, that it works. And so that's why, if you look at how algorithms with social media, how that works, you watch The Social Dilemma, you'll understand that it's this dopamine hit that we all want, that the medium is designed to basically hook our attention and to keep us interested. And so, but non-duality is kind of the refutation of that. It is the opposite to some extent, where the whole idea of non-duality is to not attach, to not have that hook. The hook brings you back, as Blues Traveler would say. But it is to break those conditions, to break those chains, to not have the hooks. And so it's just this long form kind of babbling that ends up taking place, because if you make it something that people want, or that people subscribe to, then in a sense it's not the truth. It's not what non-duality is trying to explain. So I wanted to do the opposite of that. So my very first video was, the best method to achieve non-duality, I think is what it is. And so that was kind of my intention, because if you do some research on how algorithms work and how you should label your videos and stuff like that, there's a lot of best method or the ultimate guide or 5 ways to blah blah blah, what 5 best ways to meditate, or the ultimate way to become spiritually enlightened and crap like that. And that's because it's all about hooking you into the message. And so the idea is, people have this perception of what a non-dual guru should look like, or what the message should be, or how it should be presented. And if Eckhart Tolle came out and came across as like a used car salesman, hey, you got to do this because blah blah blah, you know and have all the giant rings and stuff, the cliche that we all have in our minds, which isn't really true to a large extent, especially now. But that's the perception that we have. We would be turned off by that because we would say, hey, well, he's trying to sell me something. He's trying to sell this idea of non-duality. It's probably some religion I should avoid. And so that's, non-duality is, if you watch some speakers talk, it's just them sitting there, and then maybe they, chirp at their dog and, eat a sandwich or drink coffee or stare at the camera, or make funny faces and not seem to care. Usually it's this kind of, speaking slowly, and that it's kind of this sense of, I should talk like I had just gotten a massage, or I got to keep this PG, but I'm super relaxed and everything is just great, and I'm just saying whatever comes to mind, and there's no rush. There's just peace. There's just this emptiness, this fullness, this completion, where everything is what it is. Everything is both true and untrue. There is no person. There is no chair. Everything is perfection. As I stare deeply, lovingly into the black hole that is the camera on this laptop, you will see the truth of non-duality. Open yourself up to that reality, the deep, loving, infinite peace that brings us back to who we truly are. Who are we? That is non-duality. So that's what people in a lot of ways are looking for, is this sense, this projection of how they see a speaker should talk. So that was actually really good. I don't know how it came across to you, but I should do them more often. That kind of is what I'm saying for my meditation video of that I'm thinking about making, is kind of that whole thing. But that's just a quick, 5 minutes to the ultimate non-dual meditation. Because we look at searches, there's a lot more people searching for how to meditate versus learning about non-duality. Is kind of a real niche subject that people don't learn anything really. So it's kind of a hard one to build an audience to. But I enjoy doing these live talks. I try to do it weekly, but most likely it'll be on the weekends. And I like doing this much better than when I first started making videos and I made my best method, because when I made that video, a lot of it was kind of scripted out in my head, and I did a bunch of takes, and I think it turned out pretty well, but there was a sense of what's the right word? I wasn't super relaxed. I wasn't like, I was present, if you will, but it was kind of a stressful video to make. And the funny thing is that has way more way more views than any of my other videos. And the reason for that is because it's pointing directly to what people are seeking. They want to achieve something with non-duality. They want to find the best method. They want to, skip all the work that it takes to get somewhere. And so they want to cut through all that. And that not only do they want to understand non-duality, they want to be able to use it for something. And so that's where that video is successful. But I would point to that and say, why is that successful? And so for yourself, why are you coming to non-duality? What is your purpose? What is your drive? What are you seeking? And take a look at that, and that'll probably be more enlightening than most anything I'm saying here in this video. So there's this idea. The thing is, I have a lot of moments where I'm like, oh, I could share that in my live chats here, because I think this would be something that would maybe add value, even though non-duality does not. It may be in your circumstance with the walls that you've built, with the struggles that you're facing, maybe would add some value to your life, because that's ultimately what you're here for, I would argue. And I think, one of the things through this process that I've kind of intuited or picked up on is that, we think of internal functions and the external world as being separate, as being dual. Non-duality would point to the connection between those and have you take a look at that. But to me, the internal functions, your thoughts, feelings, emotions, the story that you tell yourself, that is, think of it as an external thing. Objectify it, if you will. Because sometimes we have this, I'm here, there's this mind, there's this soul, there's this thing that I identify with, and then there's everything else. And I think the truth of non-duality is pointing to all of that being external, because what is nothing, what is internal, the opposite of everything is nothing. And so everything would include those thoughts and feelings and emotions and all that happens internally, versus trying to see that as being separate from the outside world. So what we sense, what we experience internally has an effect on our outward reality, or how we perceive the outward reality. And not to say that there isn't an absolute truth. There are more objective descriptions of what's happening, but there is a strong way of having your perception being the reality as you see it. And if I can relate this to the Enneagram, which is this symbol here, there, I kind of was scrolling through earlier this morning about non-duality and found a video. I didn't really watch it, but basically the premise of it was that the Enneagram is somehow anti-Christian, which I think is funny to some extent. I didn't really see what their arguments were for that, but essentially it's kind of a description of how energy flows within a human being, if you want to say that. So I don't see how that's necessarily anti-religion, but it's kind of like saying, well, I'm understanding how the endocrine system works in a human body, and that's somehow anti-religious because I'm understanding more about what it means to be human. But within the Enneagram, there's feeling types. There's 9 types. There's the feeling types, there's the thinking types, and the instinctual or gut types, if you will. And I would classify myself as a thinking type, which is why I like talking about concepts and ideas. But I don't identify it as ultimately that's who I am. And so you can look at it objectively and say, this is how my habits go. This is how my human experience functions. This is how the system works, if you will, or doesn't work. And so as a type 5, how I would describe it is there is the external world, and what happens is those energies are accumulated and directed towards the mind. And so we, as 5s, identify everything intellectually, we conceptualize the world, and so that can cut us off from our instinct. And the opposite in this regard, the opposite thinking type is the 7, which is external thinking, which, what do you mean by external thinking? And so there's this core sense of anxiety, which is a part of the thought process of separating from life, separating from the fire, the instinct. So with that anxiety, the direction is to run away from it, to go out into the world through experience, to try to capture that comfort, capture that reality by avoiding what's happening internally. And so 7s can still be very intellectual, can think a lot, but the attempt is to go out through experience and avoid that feeling, that ultimate basic fear. And so the 6, which is in between the two, 7 and 5, 6 is kind of dealing with that dichotomy, that dualism. It's kind of the clear manifestation of what that basic dilemma is, where you don't know what to trust. You don't know if you can trust your mind. You don't know how to trust authority or the environment, or you don't know what end is up or what end is down. But I think with the 5, trying to internalize everything, there becomes, just from my experience, there becomes a clear dividing line in reality versus your concepts. And so when you can see that as being something that is not in line, that is there's a disconnect, it doesn't mesh with reality, then you can see that there is an issue. I'm not explaining this very well. That's fine. But so if you're scared of the environment, if the world seems a scary place that you, because a lot of it has to do with control. And so when you see the world as something that you can't control, you don't know what the future holds. You want to know what the future holds. You want to have wisdom. You want to know. That's kind of the basis of a type 5 is they want to know. They want to have control over reality of their life through knowledge. And so knowledge is power. That's the goal. And so when you try to collect all this knowledge and then you realize it's a bunch of crap, ultimately that can be a scary thing. But if you want to control life by making sure that you know, the flip side of that, of the 7, is not really wanting to know, wanting to experience, which the 6 deals with all the time. There's this sense of it being one and the same. So whether I take this basic anxiety, this fear, this primal fear that I have, and either run away from it and avoid it, or attach to it and avoid other things in life, it's the same process. And so you can see it as being the same way that you're trying to deal with that. And by seeing it, loosens the chains that connect you or that bind you to it. And so that's where, some of the wisdom of the Enneagram comes into play. By seeing who you're not, helps you understand better who you truly are, if that makes sense. So if anyone has any questions, I'd love to hear them. We got a few more minutes left. If not, I'll probably just stare deeply into the camera. And again, I enjoy your comments. Any of my videos, if you want to comment, I try to keep on top of looking at those, or subscribe. Like I said, if you're watching this live, you'll probably already been subscribed. But oh, that's what GM means. Okay. Good morning, Daryl. I think I struggled with that last time. LOL. So if you have made it through this video and it has found value for you, I think the best thing that you can do is subscribe and participate in the live talks. If it makes you feel good or makes you relax to watch this video, and you want to watch more of the videos, that's all well and good. As long as you feel like it's adding some sort of benefit to your life. But I think ultimately is really taking a look at what you're dealing with specifically and finding relief in that, finding someone that can point to it and say, hey, this is where the error in your thinking is. This is where your belief is running into illusion. And oftentimes it's just flipping it. So it's kind of like when I decided yesterday I was shooting basketball, and I've always played right-handed, and I can dribble pretty good left-handed, but not great. I decided to, at least for a period of time, just pretend that I was a left-handed shooter. And so the whole time yesterday was playing left-handed. So I would occasionally add my right hand when I was dribbling, but I shot left-handed. So the benefit as I'm older now in life is to understand that a lot of it isn't rocket science. A lot of it is pretty basic stuff as far as, where your attention goes, your energy flows. That's, kind of a cliche statement, but it's true. Or, repetition and learning, if you're someone that feels like, well, I can't meet people, I don't know how to talk to people, it's not probably anything to do with you. It's probably the fact that maybe this person needs a few more times of interaction, be able to talk to you. Because I've noticed in my life, it's sometimes it takes a handful of different times to have people have that familiarity. Well, they'll go out of their way to say good morning or to do whatever. And so if they ignore you, it's just the fact that you're not in their inner circle of mental awareness or their social circle, and so they won't say hi to you. But it's like, oh, well, no one likes me. Okay. Or maybe it's something that you're pushing people away. Who knows? You got to look into that. But so this idea that I'm a right-handed shooter in basketball, it's like, well, let's just try, because I've always been kind of ambidextrous, so it's something that's somewhat natural to me. So switching to left isn't so hard. But as I'm older, I understand that it's all about muscle memory, repetition. And so there is maybe a more natural inclination to shooting with my right hand. But if you do the reverse and just train yourself through repetition, through time, in shooting left-handed, you can end up being pretty good. whether or not you'll ultimately be better than the right hand, depending on how much time you put, that's a whole other conversation. But the idea of it is, if I define myself as a right-handed shooter, then I could be limiting the flip side of that. And so, I think through this process of shooting left-handed, I think my dual dribbling skills will improve and will be more of a, uh, certainly a threat on the basketball court. But that's where, it's just a matter of, if you always see yourself as a right-handed shooter and you never even try the other hand, then you may be limiting your capabilities, your possibilities. And I mentioned this in the last video as well, that oftentimes what you perceive as what you're struggling with, or your habits, the things that you see as a bad thing, maybe just be something that you can really add value to your life. And just the example of shooting left-handed, I know myself as being somewhat of a bulldog, where if I attach myself to something, I can, go down the rabbit hole, or really kind of be, use my obsessive inclination to the benefit. And, the idea when I was playing basketball was I wanted to make it, if you know what around the world is, you shoot um, in the corners and then 45 degrees straight on. So you go kind of shoot all the way around the court and then back. And so my goal was to make it through that without having to start over all the way through by shooting left-handed. So, being stubborn to some extent, I was able to do that ultimately, but I was shooting probably 8 to 10 feet away. And then I decided, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to do that at this point unless I practice more. So I went a little closer, but the goal was to be able to go all the way around. And so I wasn't going to stop until I did it. And so through that stubbornness, which can be seen as a negative trait, I can use that if I'm aware of it, and use that in a positive way to be able to grow and learn through shooting with the opposite hand, developing that muscle memory strength. Then what I always perceived as being maybe a negative thing can be used in the positive, negative, that sort of thing. So, all right. Well, this has been great. And we got about 2 minutes left until the hour. So I'm just going to sit here quietly. And the funny thing with these videos is, I'm not necessarily always a talker. So the fact that I go on here and talk is, this in itself has been something that, is part of the challenge to growth, part of speaking. Because I think maybe there's some people that watch this video or watch other speakers and be like, well, I could never do that. I could never be so and so, or I could never get up there and just talk because I don't know what I would say, or I don't want to look stupid, or I want to sound dumb. So I just don't have the confidence to get up and say how I feel or what I think from my perspective. And so, and granted, it's not like a novel thing these days, because we do have these forms of communication that can reach out to others, especially outside of our social circle, through these types of systems, to be able to communicate to people that are interested in the same thing. So it gives a lot of opportunity to be able to speak, just your average person to have a platform. So in that sense, it's great. So. Well, until next time, peace.